Since this is just the second review Byte video I've made, I want to advise that this video will remain moderately spoiler free, as to not dive too much into the story outside of the beginning and some of the themes of the game. Much of the early game will be covered in this video, but all of the meat and ending of the story will be left for you to figure out if you choose to play it yourself. Now, this is not a summary of the story, but rather a bite-sized look at what the game is and my experience with it. There will not be any numerical scores at the end of the video, nor a recommendation as to whether or not you should play it. That's for you to decide. I am notoriously bad at finishing games when I start them, so when I first bought Bramble months ago, I was taking a shot in the dark for a game that really piqued my interest based on the small amount of screenshots and videos from the game. Bramble The Mountain King is a grim, third-person adventure that is set in a world that is heavily inspired by dark Nordic fables. You play as Ole, the little brother of his mischievous sister Lilimor. The reason I mentioned my poor track record of finishing games is because the story for this game was gripping enough for me to want to come back and complete the game, which admittedly is easy, as the game can be completed in just about 5 or 6 hours. Bramble the Mountain King is the second release from Swedish game developer Dimfrost Studios, which started out as a small team of just 4 college students who worked on a release for a VR game called A Writer and His Daughter. When Bramble was released, it was met with critically mixed opinions, as some felt the game's puzzles were archaic and lacking depth in its gameplay. I will be taking quick bites covering the story, visuals, audio, and gameplay before I wrap it all up at the end. Please feel free to let me know in the comments your thoughts and opinions as you listen along. For this part of the review, we will be covering the opening 15 minutes of the game, so if you'd like to remain 100% spoiler free, please select the next chapter on the seek bar or in the description. You can select the timestamp next to a Byte of the Visuals section. And now, an intro into the story. The game begins with our protagonist Ole, who is awakened from a nightmare and looks to seek comfort from his older sister. The only problem is that his older sister, Lilimor, is not there. Her window is open and a blanket tied around the window. It seems that she might have snuck out of the house. So Ole decides to go out and look for her, even though the darkness outside scared him. Ole makes his way through the woods of his backyard, trying to find his sister. She was not at the large apple tree, nor was she in their treehouse. Determined to find his sister, Ole continues on past the treehouse and deeper into the woods, where eventually he falls into an old ruin where he discovers a glowing white orb being held by a statue of a girl. Ole takes the orb and continues on through the dark woods to find his sister. He climbs up the side of a small mountain where he eventually finds his sister at the top of some more ruins. Ole takes out the glowing orb to show Lilimor, and like a good big sister, she immediately takes it and starts playing with it, and encourages Ole to throw it around carelessly at pine cones in an attempt to test his skill. What could go wrong? Of course, Ole eventually overshoots his target, going right over his big sister's hands. The orb bounces towards the edge of a cliff that the ruins are on, and, well, actually, Lilimor catches it before it could fall. Ole, impressed at his sister's supreme athleticism, went to embrace her, but their combined weight was too much for the old ruins and caused it to collapse, and the siblings fall to their death. Of course, that's not where it ends. They slide down the side of the mountain quite a long way before sliding into another ruined door and emerging into a seemingly different world. It's no longer nighttime, and apparently now we're in the Mushroom Kingdom. Now, I didn't see any Koopas though, so it's more akin to being in Wonderland. Lilimor tells us to follow her, and she'll protect us, and then proceeds to put us in danger by jumping on the tops of mushrooms. Lilimor guides us through this rather large world we're now in, or are we just small? I guess I don't know. The scale is shown to us by an apple that falls down from a tree, when we're spotted by the cutest little gnome who screams like a baby and then runs off. Our sister follows. We are also introduced to a very naked pixie living in this tiny little birdhouse. Continuing on after our sister, who continues to neglect us by chasing a little gnome that spotted us, the little guy gets caught under a bell from this bell tower. We help him out and get his blessing to move on to his little town, where we are graciously welcomed. They have a tamed pet hedgehog, which is much larger than the gnomes, but he's still so gosh darn cute. After a quick game of hide and seek, the gnomes help you open the door to continue on our journey through the mysterious land of Bramble. We decide to help Papa Gnome wrangle in his naked little rumpnissers, which are mushroom-like creatures with flowers on their head, and continue on through the forest, meeting a new friend, before coming across a well. Ole decides to stare down the well for several hours until it is once again dark. Upon realizing he is alone again, he follows a pixie through the forest until he once again finds his sister, only this time, a rather large troll comes up and snatches Lillimore. Ole desperately screams while he runs away, with his only escape being the river he just crossed. It's from here Ole wakes up next to the river, helped by the Toad King. This is where his adventure really begins to find his sister and save her from the trolls. Along the way, you'll find stories of loss, terror, and make new friends, and terrifying new enemies. Composed by Dan Wakefield, Bramble's soundtrack fits thematically and does well to invoke emotion, complementing the gameplay perfectly. Boss battles are enhanced with fitting music that increases the tension of every moment. Environmental sound effects are nice, and it's clear that sound was very important to the overall design of the game. While there aren't any voiced lines by the characters themselves, the narrator, voiced by Nola Klopp, has a calm, soothing tone, and makes the game feel as if you're playing out a novel that's being read to you. Now, if you haven't heard of Nola Klopp before, she's actually voiced in a menagerie of other cartoons and TV shows, and other games like Poppy Playtime and the horror game Those Who Remain. Bramble is a beautiful mix of realism and folk art that was created using Unreal Engine. The developers did well using a fixed perspective and focusing the level of detail on items they knew would be close to the camera and far away. This allowed Dimfrost to really tune the atmosphere and create a world around you where you can feel immersed. Character design is definitely a shining point for this game as well. From the small pixies to the massive trolls, it's clear Dimfrost wanted to make memorable characters that would stick with you even after playing the game. It's not always perfect, as sometimes it feels like the models could have used a bit more polish, but the bosses are delightfully scary. Lastly, the world that was created is beautiful. Whether you're frolicking through the flowers on a hill, or running through the caves, or even running in a pool of blood and guts, you're pulled in by the quality of the environmental designs. Each environment is filled with detail that tells a story while you run around, and the variety of environments that include this level of detail is excellent. The forced third-person perspective did help with the visual design of the game, but the game often has you jumping around like it's a platformer, and with the fixed camera, you'll sometimes find yourself occasionally missing jumps, which can be annoying when there's so much platforming to do. Getting around the beautifully crafted world is slightly hindered by this, which is mostly linear and doesn't allow for free exploration most of the time anyways, but that's fine, seeing as the game is so linear itself. If the controls were made a little bit more stable, I don't think I could find much to complain about this game. That being said, the clunky controls and movement did get me a fun moment where I got to skip a small part of the game by flying up and over past a shack. In between fights with the various bosses, there are puzzles you need to solve to get from area to area, but oftentimes these are very simple to figure out and serve more as setting up for the next boss battle. I feel like the game could have benefited more from tougher puzzles, but the game definitely plays more as a work of art than it does a video game. While I very much enjoyed the boss battles as a whole, I felt the developers should have focused more on making the fights more environmentally based rather than just casting out your special light stone. I do feel the combat works with how it was implemented, but it left a little bit to be desired on occasion. It's no question that these boss battles are what kept you wanting to push through the game, and definitely were the highlights of the gameplay. I was always looking forward to the next twisted fight that was coming. Some segments of the game felt like maybe they should have just been a cutscene, like the opening segment when you're sliding down the hill. You don't even have to move your character, and in my opinion, these sliding scenes in games are just overdone and uninteresting and should just be cut out of games completely. There aren't any real threats in the game outside of the bosses unless you want to count bear traps and blobs or ripples in the water. Some of the best moments in the game are when you find yourself trying to be stealthy, hiding from larger enemies, and these moments really do invoke a sense of urgency and tension, but they are few and far between, unfortunately. And the last note that I'd like to make about the gameplay is that the pacing really isn't too bad. While there are some filler puzzles, they did a good job of pacing from tense moments to parts where you feel like you could let your guard down and breathe. You were always ready for the next time you had to be on your toes. Bramble is a gorgeous work of art featuring the story of a young boy trying to find his sister in a nightmarish world of trolls and other various enemies from Nordic folklore. The game, if you view it as an interactive novel rather than a third-person action platformer, it succeeds. I absolutely loved the contrasting themes of the game. And the game itself is basically a collection of these Nordic fables catered to fit around the story of Ole and Lillemor, and in my opinion, it's done well. If Dimfrost can figure out how to clean up the messy controls, they really could have had an instant classic here. I would like to note that the game does take on some rather dark themes, including suicide and a warning that infanticide is part of the story in this game. As horrible as it is, it doesn't appear that it was just thrown in for shock value. That part of the game definitely felt impactful and emotional in a way that drove the story forward. It comes in a time of the game where everything is meant to feel hopeless, and it drives home some of the horrors that Ole is living through. In interviews and comments by the developer, they stated that they really took a lot of care and thought about these themes, and I agree with them. If you've enjoyed this review of Bramble, please consider subscribing to the channel and giving this video a thumbs up. Let us know in the comments your thoughts and what games you'd like to see featured as our Bucket Bytes Game of the Month. If you weren't aware of the show, Bucket Bytes is a live-streamed podcast on Twitch, occasionally featuring guests in the content creation industry from streamers, YouTubers, to game developers, authors, and more. So make sure you check us out in our socials in the description to find out more. Every game of the month, we select somebody who gets the opportunity to either win a copy of the game or some other prize like t-shirts. So until next time, I'll see you later.